All praise belongs to God, truly the sustainer of all the worlds, and may his tranquility and abundant mercy fall upon Muhammad, the trustworthy one. I seek God's refuge and shelter against Satan, the outcast. In God's name, the compassionate, the perpetually merciful. Ladies and gentlemen, for quite a long while, I have stressed that the ongoing unrest and militancy, surging to unprecedented levels across the Muslim realm, is propelled by a religious narrative rooted behind it. Generally, people fail to notice this matter. Hence, I have tried to highlight this for their careful notice. People must realize it is no simple decision, truly persuading an individual to willingly sacrifice both his life and that of others. Certain distinct motivations drive it. Among Muslims, a particular doctrinal view is absorbed, then conveyed onward, and this has perpetually formed a continuous chain of dissemination overall. Numerous religious groups have championed it for the last 200 years and generated a unique body of literature. That same corpus has been utilized to instruct populace. The fact that politics have accelerated this ideology's realization remains a separate, albeit related, discussion. If circumstances in Afghanistan had not happened as they did, if major powers had not sought to exploit devout circles for their political ends, and if Muslim regimes had refused that approach, would developments truly have indeed proceeded in the manner they ultimately did? Likely not. Lacking these conditions, it is quite possible events would never have evolved as we observe them presently. Still, it remains possible these events might have eventually surfaced in some distant tomorrow nonetheless. Hence, individuals must resolve definitively if this prevailing religious narrative truly stands accurate in essence or otherwise. If validated, it inevitably yields certain consequences, which manifests across distinct forms and ways. They might emerge in one guise now, yet still shift notably tomorrow. Conversely, if that framework proves flawed, an opposing narrative must inevitably arise indeed. Openly disregarding actual conditions cannot provide any real resolution to a dilemma. Integrity requires that you wholly embrace this narrative, clearly explain its outcomes and ramifications fully to everyone, or propose an alternative narrative with comparable vigor and reasoning. For a considerable period, I have repeatedly stated this in hopes of alerting individuals to it. I further composed a piece on religious extremism, which is presently included within my published volume, Maqamat. Numerous periodicals have also printed it. In that article, I aim to clarify why a rival narrative is necessary. I succinctly noted that numerous scholars had, in reality, offered this competing narrative, which merely requires broader public acceptance to thrive. Subsequently, I believed the proper moment had arrived to introduce this narrative by compiling all its essential points. Hence, I produced that write-up, which the Daily Jang and the News released in Urdu and English, respectively. That very piece presently lies before me at hand. It is titled, Islam and the State, a Counter-Narrative. This heading conveys my disavowal of the current religious viewpoint together with every argument fully supporting it. I consider that perspective mistaken. By contrast, I have frequently elucidated the rightful Islamic viewpoint on many different instances, yet now I have resolved to set it forth in point-wise form with clearly delineated elements. It is widely recognized that this article sparked numerous responses once newspapers featured it. Academics from all quarters denounced it. I later addressed that censure through 4 following written pieces. Allow me initially to concisely acquaint you with the foundation behind this counter-narrative I proposed. What was my incentive for presenting it? During earlier talks, I mentioned that Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, and Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, famously dubbed the Aimai Arba, meaning 4 Imams, rose to prominence as foremost authorities on Islamic jurisprudence in their era. Likewise, several other eminent figures examined the faith in entirety, accounting for its diverse dimensions and fusing them into a cohesive and all-encompassing exposition. Foremost in that group is Imam Ghazali. I have offered a concise overview of his efforts. Next come Ibn Taymiyyah and his notable disciple Ibn Qayyim, considered analogous to the second of the two. This is a Quranic reference for Abu Bakr, the Prophet's earliest successor. Another major figure is Imam Shah Waliullah, whose impact indeed extends to every movement across the Indian subcontinent region and farther. The latest notable figure is Maulana Maududi himself. In some respects, he recast Ibn Taymiyyah's Salafi interpretation under a rather distinctly novel framework. Consequently, a carefully reasoned perspective emerged which is commonly recognized today as Islam's distinctly politically oriented interpretation or viewpoint. Furthermore, the phenomenon that arose from this concept is widely named political Islam. I previously presented those 4 figures and how they viewed the religion holistically. Reflecting on Maulana Maududi's era, one might fairly claim that across numerous distinct phases of development, classical religious thinking fully attained its ultimate peak precisely during that particular historical moment. Rather than dispersed notions, it crystallized into a fully coherent, structured explanation. Each of its segments assumed their correct positions. He offered his understandings persuasively, supporting them with a suitable, sound, logical basis and structure. Prior to Maulana Maududi's fully articulating it as a quite comprehensive interpretation, despite his remarkable writing gift, Iqbal had distinctly already stepped into public prominence. Iqbal never fashioned his works into a systematic interpretation, nor was that enterprise ever truly intended as his mission. Yet one may assert that he employed the most captivating register in this connection. In earlier talks, I recited a few of his verses and also highlighted his background for you. I clarified how he gives voice to the essence guiding this religious ideology. Each notion indeed carries an inherent spirit within, whether it be philosophical, Sufi-oriented, or representing some different perspective entirely. Should you seek an insight into the spirit driving this thought we address, you will encounter its most splendid, most extraordinary, and most enthralling illustration in full measure within the verses of Iqbal's poetry. Concurrently, he likewise directed focus toward an entirely notable separate concern. From his perspective, it remains truly imperative that we reframe our religious philosophy in order to fully confront contemporary difficulties effectively. He believed that should newly sovereign Muslim territories ultimately open the possibility for a restored caliphate, reviving the classical notion of imama, in which the ruler was titled as imam, then, once that materializes again, society would indeed witness a tangible, profound, cohesive synthesis between governance and Islamic law. In his estimation, reconstruction remained necessary, meaning we ought to fully deliberate on displaying it suitably and effectively before every contemporary audience worldwide. That too marked one of his significant inputs. On one side, he expressed this revitalizing spirit through his verse, while on the other side, he underscored the deep necessity for such a renewed framework. Such was the scholarly effort he undertook in his volume, The Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, essentially compiled as a notable series of his own lectures. He aimed in those opening talks to depict the Sufi worldview in a new manner, providing arguments that allow ideas such as wahi, divine revelation, to become fully accessible for contemporary audiences. He additionally, in the fourth talk regarding ijtihad, spotlighted the notable flaws inherent within our current jurisprudential structure. I shall refrain from discussing his final inferences immediately, yet the resulting viewpoint that surfaced was truly and distinctly encouraging. For the first time, an individual indicated that Islamic intellectual tradition demanded a remodeling of foundations. As already mentioned, this represented a final convergence. Maulana Maududi's expounded Muslim thinking in an integrated interpretive form. That viewpoint already existed fragmentarily within our established body of classical jurisprudence. Concurrently, Allama Iqbal insisted that this concept required, to some extent, a fundamental overhauling or reconstruction to remain fully viable. Yet at this juncture, that discussion ceased. From my perspective, classical doctrine ultimately achieved the apex of its expression. During that same period, another distinguished figure emerged, yet his contributions remained almost entirely truly obscure to common audiences throughout his lifetime. That individual was Imam Hamiduddin Farahi. Today, individuals are generally familiar with his biography. Maulana Sayyid Suleiman Nadwi and Farahi's direct pupil, Maulana Amin Ahsan Islahi, composed admirable articles profiling his life. He impressed numerous eminent scholars of that era, all acknowledging him as a leading imam and teacher. Among them feature such figures as Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar, Maulana Sayyid Suleiman Nadwi, and similarly, various other leading scholars. Thinkers of that distinction consistently deemed it an honor to approach him as learners, yet the general populace remained uninformed about him. His life story is not currently under review. Let me now proceed to our immediate subject matter. I have previously brought before you 4 eminent figures of Muslim history, each possessing a developed religious viewpoint and all of whom wielded influence throughout the entire Islamic world. You may include Imam Hamiduddin Farahi within these prominent names, or maybe rank him even higher. Parallel to the traditional perspectives reaching maturity in the figures of Maulana Maududi and Allama Iqbal, Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, who was operating quietly in a small township, advanced an altogether fresh and novel line of reasoning. He contended that prevailing methods of Quran study and formal instruction were truly not entirely correct. Hence, a fresh perspective arose, insisting that the Quran serve as the central axis of every key religious discipline. He provides a personal recollection, meticulously detailing what prompted him to embrace that innovative idea in those early years during his tenure teaching at Madrasatul Islam Sindh in Karachi. The Quran is usually viewed as fragmented sets of verses, lacking any strict coherent sequence. Even a scholar such as Shah Waliullah holds that the Quran constitutes clusters of short passages without obvious internal linkage, not wholly unconnected, yet essentially a compilation of smaller, thematically coherent verse groupings overall. In his treatise, Al-Fawz Al-Kabir, Shah Waliullah explicitly likens the Quran to a royal address or royal proclamations, compiled in an integrated form. Sometimes, a royal decree can be just one sentence, a paragraph, or even a protracted proclamation. In his view, the Quran corresponds closely to that same paradigm. Imam Farahi, though, remained unconvinced by that perspective. Thus, the revered Quran transformed into the focal point of all his contemplation. Throughout broader Muslim history, scarcely any instances exist where the Quran was made the very pivot of one's life, ideas, and perception. In most cases, eminent scholars pursued multiple fields in parallel and composed Quranic commentaries concurrently with those other areas. However, Imam Farahi's situation differed significantly. Here, an individual renounced all other pursuits, devoting himself entirely and exclusively to intensive Quranic investigation. Subsequently, making the Quran his principal concern, he began engaging with various associated fields as well. This gave rise to an utterly fresh Quranic methodology and an unmistakably singular interpretive approach overall. I initially encountered Farahi's scholarship back when I was in college. Because Punjab University's library lay near my campus, I often visited it with considerable regularity and enthusiasm. One afternoon, while I was looking for various Quran-related works, I spotted a title in the catalogue bearing Farahi's name alongside it. The name Farahi immediately struck me as slightly intriguing. I requested that volume and rapidly took possession of it. It was a short pamphlet, and I began reading it while standing by the window near the catalogue area. Anyone among you who visited that spot would understand precisely what I mean. Perusing that booklet introduced me to an unfamiliar intellectual realm. That concise pamphlet proved enough to expose me to a distinct mode of reasoning. That specific version was revised and brought out by Badruddin Islahi. Within his foreword, he stated that, given Farahi's student and my mentor, Maulana Amin Ahsan Islahi, was unavailable, he had decided to release the booklet independently. That was the moment I realized Maulana Amin Ahsan Islahi's role in that respect. Previously, I held awareness of him purely on account of his involvement with the Jamaat-e-Islami group. Yet I scarcely focused on him, as the presence of Maulana Maududi dominated all figures. Hence, precisely at that juncture, I discovered for the first time a fresh dimension concerning Maulana Islahi. On numerous occasions, I have fully recounted the story of how I commenced searching for him and ultimately encountered him in 1973 personally. Afterward, I opted to pursue Quranic studies under his guidance. The principal accomplishment of Imam Hamiduddin Farahi lies in his remarkable elucidation of the Quran's linguistic structure and stylistic features. Owing to that, numerous uncertainties and reservations were effortlessly resolved, or perhaps entirely dispelled. Many observers assert that he revealed the Quran's intrinsic nazm, or cohesion. My view is that he truly uncovered the Quran's linguistic and rhetorical framework. Nazm, coherence, arose merely as a secondary outcome. Put differently, what once looked disjointed now emerged as a unified discourse, with its surah structure demonstrably logical and clear. A person grasps the full importance of his efforts solely through careful study. Yet, a remarkable undertaking of this nature, also a historic milestone, cannot achieve completion instantly. Any project of this sort invariably demands considerable time investment. Those illustrious figures I mentioned before operated within a well-grounded, already recognized legacy. Imam Ghazali's endeavors, for instance, were not wholly unprecedented in essence. A substantial body of foundational knowledge already existed in fiqh, Islamic law, hadith, nahu, grammar, and in diverse streams of ilm-ul-kalam, theology, all preceding his era. Consequently, Ghazali had the opportunity to compose his Ihya volume. It was never instantaneous. It emerged from an approximately 400-year intellectual heritage. A parallel situation applies to Imam Ibn Taymiyyah as well as numerous others. Yet in Imam Farahi's situation, we cannot claim he likewise followed the prominent scholars spanning that long-standing heritage. Certainly not in any comparable sense whatsoever. At this point, an altogether new reality materialized. Since Farahi's research placed the Quran squarely at the core of every religious field, He perceived the transformative impact it could exert on each of those domains. For example, once Newton or Einstein introduced an entirely fresh paradigm that superseded Aristotelian science, earlier frameworks were rendered obsolete. Against this backdrop, Farahi made a wise choice to withdraw from society so he could finalize his intellectual pursuits. He refrained from taking part in that period's political campaigns. Whenever he did involve himself, it was narrowly circumscribed, like his period at Jamia Osmania, his management of Madrasatul Islah Azamgar, or his presidency over Darul Musanifin. He primarily interacted with fellow scholars. He sincerely wished to mentor either Maulana Abul Kalam Azad or Maulana Muhammad Ali Johar personally, hoping thereby to entrust his accumulated wisdom to one of them in full. Both men wholeheartedly esteemed him. Some among you may recall the written controversy that arose between Maulana Abul Kalam Azad and Maulana Abdul Majid Daryabadi. I might have alluded to this particular episode in certain talks. What transpired was that Maulana Daryabadi submitted a psychology-themed paper for printing in Maulana Azad's periodical Al-Hilal. Maulana Daryabadi had shifted his focus to faith from philosophy. Within that piece, Daryabadi rendered the English phrase pain and pleasure into Urdu as haz o karb. It is common knowledge that psychology addresses these kinds of issues. In a footnote, editor Maulana Azad remarked that rendering pain and pleasure as lazato alam would be more vivid than using haz o karb. Daryabadi, however, disagreed and initiated a contentious exchange regarding that point. Although lazat o alam clearly constitutes a refined version, Daryabadi refused to endorse that translation approach. Numerous correspondences took place concerning this disagreement. The Urdu journal Nukush dedicated a special edition to epic literary clashes, where this entire exchange was compiled. Anyone seeking to review that dialogue can consult the relevant collected material. That correspondence holds considerable historical importance indeed. Maulana Daryabadi enjoyed recognition for his scholarship, whereas Maulana Azad stood out as a remarkable historical figure. Anyone keen on literature, philology, or the subtleties of translation ought to consult these superb compositions. Even then, Maulana Daryabadi refused to shift from his stance. At that juncture, Azad proposed submitting the disagreement before Imam Farahi, believing him to be the sole scholar adept in both Eastern and Western branches of learning. From this, one can gauge Imam Farahi's considerable sway over an intellect like Azad. A reader immediately perceives Azad's distinctive literary manner upon examining his Quranic commentary, Tafsir. That approach, once more, reflects Farahi's strong impact on him. It transpired that Imam Farahi resided in Nadwa for roughly 3 months, where at Shibli's request, he gave Quranic lectures. Maulana Azad participated in those sessions as a pupil. One can plainly detect that effect in his exegesis. This truly represents a completely different realm. Prior to him, nobody studied the Quran in this manner. The impetus behind this method was neither philosophical nor mystical. Instead, it stemmed from his profound contemplation and linguistic mastery. It seemed he moved across ages to the era in which that tongue was alive, as though the language's entire framework progressively unveiled itself before his eyes. Merely glancing at a verse or phrase allowed it to reveal fresh layers to him. His life revolved around the Quran, which is clear from the extensive writings he composed on it. He wrote Mufradat al-Quran, which examined Quranic vocabulary, Asalib al-Quran, which addressed Quranic stylistics, and Nizam al-Quran, which focused on the Quran's overall framework, among several additional works following that same pattern. He additionally succeeded in composing exegesis on a number of final Quranic surahs. The majority of his works were authored in Arabic, later rendered into Urdu. by Maulana Amin Ahsan Islahi. These writings now appear collectively as Majmua Tafasir-e Farahi. During the period Maulana Islahi was gradually releasing his Urdu renderings in the publication Al-Islah, Maulana Syed Abul Ala Maududi evaluated them concurrently in Tarjuman al-Quran. Throughout those critiques, he offered considerable praise for Imam Farahi and his deep mastery of Arabic letters. He likewise commended Maulana Islahi for delivering such outstanding Urdu versions of Farahi's writings, advising anyone aspiring to master the technique of rendering eloquent Arabic texts into Urdu to study them. Professor Khurshid Ahmad has further compiled those critical evaluations into an independent volume entitled Adabiyat-e Maududi, alongside authoring Quran-focused texts such as Mufradat al-Quran, Asalib al-Quran, Nizam al-Quran, and Al-Takmil fi Usul al-Tawil. Imam Farahi uncovered novel insights within related religious fields, routinely scribbling these discoveries as marginal notations in various books. His plan was to incorporate these fresh observations into the many works he had begun, yet never completed fully. He maintained concurrent efforts on roughly 70 or 80 separate manuscripts in this way. He might insert an additional perspective into a volume and then move on. Such annotations are currently being released. Moreover, in the course of his Quranic research, he jotted marginal notes, all of which have also since been published. He had gone as far as beginning a thorough, structured Quranic exegesis, yet managed to complete only 66 verses of Surah Baqarah. All these writings exist solely in Arabic. Most of those endeavors stayed unfinished. Even Asalib al-Quran merely compiles his marginal memoranda and insights. A similar situation applies to Mufradat al-Quran. Recently, Dr. Ajmal Islahi brought out its publication from Beirut. This version presents the genuine annotations for Mufradat al-Quran plus assorted reflections by Imam Farahi previously dispersed throughout his works, thereby achieving a notably comprehensive compilation overall. In his lifetime, Imam Farahi finished only a handful of texts, including Aqsam al-Quran and Al-Rai al-Sahih fi man huwa al-Zabi. Indeed, Rashid Rida, a prominent Egyptian scholar and disciple of Mufti Muhammad Abdu, arranged for Aqsam al-Quran to be issued in Egypt itself. He also composed a superb preface accompanying that work. Accordingly, we see Farahi addressing subjects of principal concern while also recording incidental reflections on various questions, in addition to expressing viewpoints about associated religious fields. His Quranic studies did more than uncover the text's internal cohesion. They likewise illuminated the Quran's fundamental character in a remarkably clear manner. The fact that I can now assert the primary subject of the Quran is a messenger's warning, indar, to his community, a notion virtually unheard of in Islamic tradition, flows directly from Farahi's groundbreaking insights. His technique of comprehending the Quran did captivate a number of his peers, though they never truly delved thoroughly enough to appreciate its full depth. As I noted, Shibli was the figure who first made his research accessible publicly. Farahi studied under Shibli, who initially guided him through foundational texts of Islamic learning. He likewise happened to be Shibli's maternal cousin. Periodically, Shibli would present Farahi's writings at Nadwa, sometimes critiquing them in his role as an instructor. Those rebukes themselves have likewise entered the historical record. Shibli initially critiqued Farahi's treatise on Balaga or rhetoric, thus becoming the pioneer who ushered it into scholarly domains. Maulana Syed Abu al-Ala Maududi also authored some reviews. There exist extremely few occasions in his Quranic exegesis where Maulana Maududi explicitly censures any individual by name. Within his exegesis on Surah Fil, chapter 105, he cites Imam Farahi to critique his view, yet only after giving a commendable outline of him and his works. So what was the influence of his writings? There could not have been any meaningful influence, as he departed too early on account of an illness. He underwent a surgical procedure but failed to survive, ultimately breathing his last in Mathura. Maulana Amin Ahsan Islahi recounted this anecdote multiple times. Once the surgery was deemed unsuccessful, Maulana went to see Imam Farahi personally. Dr. Hafiz, a close associate of Imam Farahi, was the one who operated. Medical technology of that period remained quite limited. Maulana Islahi recounted that upon his entering, Imam Farahi simply stated aloud, "Amin has arrived." Maulana Islahi sensed that by saying Amin has come, the Imam actually intended, the trustee of my teachings is here. Soon thereafter he died, and merely 7 or 8 individuals joined his funeral service. His burial took place in Mathura. No one recognized the individual who arrived here and departed in silence. Even though his entire life centered on the Quran, he never managed to compose a complete exegesis. He undoubtedly conveyed his perspective on numerous subjects. As mentioned, he produced an exegesis on a segment of Surah Baqarah, plus a few shorter surahs now included in Majmu'ah Tafasir-i Farahi. He further shared his insights on multiple scholarly domains. However, nearly all such projects remained incomplete eventually. We can assert with certainty that a major advance emerged, or at least its basis was established. That was all. There remained a considerable distance for it to travel. It is commonly noted that during his final 5 years, upon seeing figures like Abul Kalam Azad and Muhammad Ali Johar immersed in political work, he turned to Madrasatul Islah students, identifying Amin Ahsan as the one to inherit his legacy. Subsequently, Maulana Islahi traveled to see Imam Farahi personally. At that stage, he had completed his madrasa studies and was serving as the editor of a paper named Madina. Imam Farahi inquired of Maulana Islahi, "Would you rather remain an editor or study the Quran under my guidance?" Maulana Islahi recounted that he responded, "If your intention is to teach me the Quran, I'll abandon this minor position at once." Consequently, Maulana Islahi opted to resign from his employment and stay under Imam Farahi's instruction for 5 more years. One can hardly picture Maulana Islahi's demeanor each time he spoke about his mentor. Despite being in his 90s and a distinguished scholar, it was as though he reverted to a childlike state whenever recalling those moments with him. I recall these particular verses from Iqbal. इल्म की संजीदा गुफ्तारी, बुढ़ापे का शाऊर, सोहबत मादर में तिफले सादा रह जाते हैं हम. Lofty discussions of intellect, the ripened insight of elder years, yet by our mother's side we remain mere innocent offspring. That accurately captures his state whenever he spoke of Imam Farahi, so intense that even his tone and manner shifted. He assumed an entirely distinct demeanor. He frequently recounted stories regarding his teacher's experiences. I only wish these cameras had recorded those unforgettable times when he depicted such occurrences through his narration. I am presently remembering numerous similar anecdotes myself. He told us on one occasion that he had been reading Mu'allaqat but could barely understand Arabic verse. Consequently, he voiced certain comments about it, shaped by his mindset. Certain instructors approached Imam Farahi, informing him that his pupil, Amin Ahsan, belittled Arabic poetry by remarking that it's unclear if the poet lauds his beloved or his she-camel. Upon receiving that grievance, Imam Farahi remarked that Amin likely had yet to grasp Arabic verse properly. Then he summoned Maulana Islahi, inquiring directly regarding the entire issue. Islahi admitted that in fact he did hold that opinion. Imam Farahi merely grinned before requesting that he recite an Arabic line. Islahi, taken aback by the instruction, proceeded to recite Imr al-Qaiz's opening couplet. Kifa nabki min dikra habibin wa manzili farahi, then requested he render it into Urdu. Islahi provided a verbatim version in the conventional clerical style. दोस्तों ज़रा ठहर जाओ ताकि हम याद ताज़ा करें महबूब की भी और उसके ठहरने की जगह की भी. Stop friends so that I refresh the memories of my beloved as well as the place where she stayed. Farahi, finding that version lacking in expression, proposed his personal interpretation instead. दोस्तों ठहरो जानान और मंजिले जानान पे दो आंसू बहाने दो. Hold on, dear companions, let me weep briefly for my beloved and the dwelling she once occupied. Maulana Islahi remarked that Farahi's translation captured the verse's finer shades, and from that point onward, he genuinely learned to value Arabic poetry. Another time, he recounted a story from when he was examining Hamasa's commentary by Maulana Faiz al-Hassan Saharanpuri, who happened to be Imam Farahi's own teacher. Within one specific section, he stumbled upon la, signifying no, and found himself unable to grasp its exact contextual nuance. He posed the query to Farahi, who was descending the steps of his library at the time, pencil in hand. After descending, he approached Farahi directly to inquire about that la. He jotted on the page with his pencil, La hiya nadira. He then explained the usage of the Urdu na in poetry, and Maulana Islahi understood its usage. In some languages, certain words are used for emphasis, and may yet give the sentence the converse meaning. So he pointed it out to Islahi. Similarly, there is the case of Maulana Ashraf Ali Thanvi, declaring Imam Farahi a kafir, disbeliever. Thanvi had issued a fatwa, religious edict, stating that Farahi was a disbeliever. There is a small booklet of Imam Farahi titled Khayalat Asna-e-Tarjuma-e-Quran. It has now been published. This booklet in Urdu is also quite interesting. It is one of the very few Urdu works of Imam Farahi. If you study it, you will get a fair idea of the perspective from which a scholar approaches an issue. In this booklet, Farahi has dealt with the translation of the Quran and the possible equivalence of Quranic ideas in a different language, along with examples. Perhaps a cleric had sent an example provided by Imam Farahi to Maulana Thanvi, who then issued his fatwa against Farahi, holding this example to be in violation of religion. Maulana Islahi said that he was very upset over this fatwa, and so was the madrasa. This fatwa even shocked some scholars like Maulana Hussain Ahmad Madni, who approached Maulana Thanvi himself to deliver a passionate speech against this fatwa. He was a great admirer of Imam Farahi. Maulana Amin Ahsan Islahi stated that he was emotionally charged over the fatwa and rushed to meet Imam Farahi. If Imam Farahi is not a Muslim, then who else is, he thought. Even Shibli had been declared a disbeliever. So, Maulana Islahi found Imam Farahi descending the stairs and informed him of the fatwa by Maulana Thanvi. Imam Farahi simply looked away and replied, "He doesn't know me. That's all." Maulana Amin Ahsan told us how he admired the eloquence of this response. A common person would interpret it as indifference on the part of Imam Farahi. However, in reality, it was an analysis of the entire fatwa, meaning, the learned cleric has no idea about my work. Leave it and let him go his own way. But I have deviated from my main topic. Let us return to what I was saying. I was telling you that the work Imam Farahi carried out did not culminate in his life. He could not even complete his commentary on the Quran. Maulana Islahi spent some 5 years with him when he was himself about 25 years old. He not only studied the Quran from Imam Farahi, but also followed his methodology very closely. Then, for quite some time, he wrote many essays in the journal Al-Islah, elaborating on Imam Farahi's thought. He even edited and translated many works of Imam Farahi. But, according to what he told us himself, when Maulana Sayyid Abu al-Ala Maududi raised the slogan, of Iqamati Din, establishment of Islamic order. He got swept with the tide, for he didn't want to be left behind in this noble task. He said this in a lighter vein. Anyway, that is a different story concerning how he came to Pathankot. He spent about 15 years thus occupied. Then, a small dispute within the organization, Jamaat-e-Islami, escalated to such a level that he eventually parted ways with them. It was, however, a blessing in disguise. Had he not separated himself from organizational matters, he would not have been able to complete his commentary, Tadabbur-e-Quran, and I am stating a fact. Then he withdrew from worldly affairs, just as his eminent teacher had done, and God bestowed him with the time he required to complete his monumental commentary. He commenced writing this commentary in 1956 or 1957, when he was 52 or 53 years old. Apparently, it seemed unlikely that he would be able to complete it under normal conditions, but God allowed him the time to write this commentary based on Imam Farahi's approach and to expound on his new findings on hitherto unknown aspects of the Quran. In this work, besides making many original contributions, he has also critically evaluated his teacher's views and expressed his difference of opinion in certain places. However, the breakthrough accomplished by Imam Farahi has continued further and even progressed. In light of that approach, Maulana Islahi authored a monumental commentary in 9 volumes known as Tadabbur-e-Quran. After this, the need to apply this new appreciation of the Quran to the entire religion arose. This is the indispensable outcome of the work carried out on the Quran. This is similar to what I have explained as Imam Ghazali's objective in writing the Ihya, or Shah Waliullah's objective in writing Hujjat Allah al-Baligha. Therefore, I decided to work on this project and created an outline of it. Al-Bayan stemmed from some other demands. However, in Meezan, it was my objective to explain the entire religion, keeping in view this new approach to the Quran. If a certain approach gave birth to Ihya or Hujjat Allah al-Baligha or Maulana Maududi's Islami Nizam-e-Zindagi, this new approach demands a reassessment of the entire religion once more. This is the thought that gave rise to Meezan. Therefore, I have mentioned in my article that the points I have raised here have already been discussed in detail in my book, Meezan. Meezan obviously deals with our religion as a whole. Matters concerning the state occupy lesser space in it as compared to the more detailed chapters on beliefs and worship rituals. Keeping that in view, I have prepared a summary of the understanding presented in that book in this article. These were the conditions around writing this article. I will now read it and explain its points. However, before I do so, let me tell you something about the breakthrough that made it possible for me to come up with this counter-narrative. If you remember, in one of our sessions, I had explained the actual source of the present religious narrative. I had said that their argument is based on that great historical episode that took place in the period of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions, in which the Prophet, peace be upon him, established a full-fledged state. The Arabian Peninsula witnessed a great revolution. This state then rapidly expanded to overthrow great empires around it. In place of the Roman and Persian empires, an Islamic caliphate was established. This history is the source of the present narrative. This history, I reiterate, is well established, and you just cannot question its historicity. It is not an isolated report or the account of one historian. Even the blind can see it. It is a practical manifestation of this narrative. Some people have attempted to overlook this well-established history. You will find examples of this in the works of Allama Shibli Nomani as well as some Arab scholars. I have fully enumerated that narrative before you. Whoever has attempted to escape from this established history has adopted a certain method. They have tried to interpret certain incidents from this established history in a different way, but they have not been able to substantiate these interpretations. Shibli, for instance, tried to provide an alternative interpretation of jizya while someone else attempted to prove the prophetic battles as merely defensive. It was one way of looking at them. The Battle of Badr was, after all, initiated by the Quraysh. This is how some people tried to reinterpret the events. You will find many such interpretations put forward in the past century and a half, but all of them are nullified by the reality of that historical episode. They may provide an alternative understanding of a few incidents, but they do not possess the force to challenge the entire narrative. This historical reality is irrefutable. It has happened exactly as I have explained, giving rise to the narrative of the present religious thought. Therefore, you cannot dispute this narrative because its source is well established. The criticisms commonly used against this narrative, at the most, only succeed in creating some ambiguity about the causes of certain events. Nevertheless, the actual narrative re-emerges with its full strength. As I was saying, the breakthrough that Imam Farahi accomplished is not precise and prominent in his works. It is present only in scattered parts, found fragmentarily in various passages. It is the same with my great teacher, Maulana Islahi's works. Since this concept did not go through the phase of application and emerge as a comprehensive law, it does not appear to be present with the same degree of precision as it now appears in my works. Its genesis, however, lies in the works of Imam Farahi. Now that I have formulated it as a law and explained its applications, anyone taking a fresh look at the works of Imam Farahi will recognize that the same concept has been discussed in them. Perhaps you may feel it is discussed in their works without much clarity pertaining to its application, or you may find some other things violating this concept. This commonly happens in the beginning of any new perspective. Socrates serves as a good example here. Things take time to form clearly and precisely. They are not so clear and precise in the beginning. A thing only becomes clear after going through all the three levels. Firstly, the contents of the idea are fully explained from its source. I have submitted before you that even this did not happen in the case of Imam Farahi. He was able to touch upon only some portions of this idea. Secondly, after explaining the idea and its contents, it has to go through the process of application. Many aspects of an idea become clear and precise only when it is applied. This process did not materialize even in the lifetime of Maulana Amin Ahsan Islahi. In fact, many of his writings from the Jamaat-e-Islami period restate the old narrative. At certain places, those writings stand parallel to some portions of the Tadabbur-e-Quran. Anyway, since the idea is now in a more specific form, you can see its presence there. What was that basic idea or the breakthrough? This breakthrough concerns the great historical episode that ensued from the arrival of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his migration to Medina, the establishment of a sovereign state which then dominated the entire Arabian Peninsula and within a short time overthrew the surrounding Persian and Roman empires. It also concerns certain steps taken by the first Caliph, Sayyidina Abu Bakr. All this did take place, one cannot deny it. However, as soon as the Quran was seen as a coherent discourse and its literary styles were properly appreciated, a new way of understanding this historical episode was introduced. Seen from this perspective, this episode was unrelated to matters of religion and Sharia. Rather, it was simply a manifestation of a divine sunnah, practice, according to which God establishes his judgment on the people to whom he sends his messenger. I have already explained this practice in detail in my writings and lectures. I will not go into its details here. The Quran is in Arabic, which is still a living language. People communicate in it. However, the way Imam Hamiduddin Farahi was able to appreciate the language of the Quran and demonstrate how it communicates its intent opened the doors to another world. One of the outcomes of this approach was realized in his very lifetime. It revealed the nazm, coherence of the Quranic discourse. Prior to this, Many people had this view that the Quran contained a certain nazm, structural coherence. For example, Zamakhshari insists on this. However, the kind of nazm it had was unclear. That matter was revealed through the proper appreciation of its language. This concept of nazm also kept evolving further. For example, you will find the structural coherence of the Quran in a more developed form in Ishahi's Tadabburi Quran than in Farahi's Nizam al-Quran. Furthermore, if you then examine this in my works, such as Meezan, you will find this coherence explained with greater precision than both the aforementioned works. Similarly, this idea of a specific divine practice, Sunnatullah, manifesting itself in the case of God's messengers was revealed in the works of Imam Hamiduddin Farahi. As such, that historical episode related to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions was neither a political struggle nor a political revolution. It had no connection with the idea of an Islamic state. You can see the entire paradigm of understanding and studying the religion changes because of this perspective. You know that when Maulana Syed Abu al-Ala Maududi started his movement, he delivered a lecture in Aligarh Muslim University. The title of the lecture was Islami Riyasat Kaise Qayam Hoti Hai. English, the process of establishing an Islamic state. Maulana Maududi was considered as the greatest pamphleteer of his time. The Jamaat-e-Islami movement was primarily based on some 10 pamphlets. Although Maulana Maududi has authored more than 100 books, these 10 pamphlets became the foundation of the movement. The most influential among them is the one I just mentioned. The rest of the 10 pamphlets include titles such as Shahadat-e-Haq Kya Hai, Jihad fi Sabilillah, Banao aur Bigar, Salamati ka Rasta, etc. However, the pamphlet concerning the process of establishing an Islamic state is the most influential. This pamphlet consists of the transcript of a lecture he delivered in Aligarh. Generally, Maulana Maududi used to write down his speeches. In this way, his speeches are also available in the form of text. In this pamphlet, he has based his entire argument on the historical episode that I have explained to you. Taking this historical episode as the source, he stated that our objective was the establishment of a global Islamic government by replicating the methodology adopted by the Prophet, peace be upon him. In a way, the entire life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, is the source. In the pamphlet, not a single verse of the Quran or any other text has been cited. He has drawn upon this historical episode and framed the entire lecture around it. Soon after this, a time came when Maulana Islahi began to exercise an influence on Jamaat-e-Islami's religious thought, and he wrote the book that I introduced in my lectures in Canada. It is titled Dawat-e-Deen or Uska Tariqa Kar, Preaching Islam and Its Methodology. In this book, he has explained Dawah as a science, keeping the Prophet's method of Dawah in view. The last chapter of this book is titled Dawat ke Marahil, the stages of Dawah. In this chapter, he said that the process would begin with the general call and warning, followed by Hijrat o Barat, migration and acquittal, followed by Iqdam, active conflict, resistance, etc. Dr. Israr Ahmad has explained all these stages in detail in his book Manhaj-e-Inquilab-e-Nabawi, Prophetic Model of Revolution. This work is much more elaborate, and Dr. Israr has added a few stages such as Sabr-e-Mehaz, passive resistance. About Iqdam, active conflict resistance, he said that today its form would vary, and we can draw on concepts like Tagir Bilyad, stopping evil with your hand, and Nahi Anil Munkar, forbidding evil. This is a discussion for another time though. Here I am, just trying to delineate how a historical episode became a source for classical understanding. The classical understanding views that historical episode as a call to God's religion, its message, and the universal manifestation of its Sharia law as a system. Therefore, in its view, this episode is the best example as the source of the prophetic model and Islamic revolution. However, Owing to the new approach of Imam Hamiduddin Farahi, this entire view changed. Whatever happened during the Prophet's time was simply a manifestation of a divine sunnah or practice. It was not a struggle for an Islamic revolution or for the establishment of an Islamic state. It was merely a manifestation of the divine practice concerning God's messengers. In addition, when we study the other works of Imam Farahi, he points to something else that I have explained later on with more detail. Just as the Quran is an account of the manifestation of this divine practice, the Bible too is an account of another divine practice. The misunderstanding similar to ours had also developed among the Jews before us. In the Bible, the Almighty selected the progeny of Abraham, peace be upon him, as prophets in the second period. In the first period, the Almighty selected only individuals as prophets. In the second period of this world, God selected an entire progeny for that task. The Quran has expressed it in one verse. Allah did choose Adam and Noah, the family of Abraham, and the family of Imran above all people. Quran 3:33. The Bible is actually an account of the law of God's dealing with the progeny of Abraham, while the Quran is an account of the divinely ordained mission of Muhammad, peace be upon him, as a messenger. Thus, the historical episode we are dealing with is true and undeniable. It was bound to become the basis of an argument. However, Imam Farahi revealed this secret of the Quran and what it was that the Quran was trying to convey. If we study the usual introduction and description of the Quran by classical scholars, we see that they have completely missed this point. They highlight the Quran's guidance and the message it offers for humanity. However, there is no clear analysis or generation of a dialogue on the nature and substance of the Quran as a text. The Quran is an account of a messenger's indhar, warning. It is also an account of the manifestation of sunnah-e Ilahi, divine practice. A specific divine practice manifested itself in the way that the Almighty dealt with a certain people. Similarly, the Bible is an account of the manifestation of a divine practice concerning Abraham's progeny. The entire Bible is like this. The biblical corpus includes books that were revealed while this process was going on with them. It also includes history with some errors written by the Jews. This is not the issue under discussion, but I am mentioning this to exemplify how this is a new perspective of looking at the Bible, which has not been undertaken before. Now, due to this paradigm shift, the historical episode that we are discussing cannot be employed as a basis for an argument. It is neither a revolutionary methodology, nor the application of any directive of Sharia, nor a religiously ordained practice that we have to perform. In reality, a divine practice had been manifested, albeit in a way that was new. This is an oft-occurring practice pertaining to God's messengers, such as Noah, Lot, and others. However, here, the mode in which it occurred was different from how it had been occurring historically, which became the cause of the misunderstanding. It will be right to claim that this perspective completely changed the prevalent mode of thought. This is the reason why I have placed the source of the classical line of thinking before you. My only comment on it would be to accept the fact of its occurrence while taking care not to view it as an implementation of a Shar'i hukum, religious directive. Rather, it was the manifestation of a divine practice, sunnatullah. If I were to comment on Dr. Javed Ahmed's view or that of Maulana Maududi's prior to him, I would say that the process that is claimed to be the source of a revolutionary methodology for establishing a caliphate or a global government cannot serve as a source in any way or form. It was merely the fulfillment of a divine practice, and it has happened in its ultimate form. It can neither be a model for one to imitate nor a source on which to build an argument. This is how the very source of this argument has been challenged. This has been our contribution. Now that this source stands challenged, it does not hold much worth as proof, except that certain people will try to prove its validity as a source and I will continue to show that it was merely the manifestation of a divine practice. I will not go into further explanation of this practice in these lectures, since I have already explained it in great detail earlier. One only needs to understand the perspective that has caused this paradigm shift. Keep the source and my critique in the background. The intention of my critique is not to dispute what happened, but rather to question the nature of what happened. What had actually happened? I have explained what had actually happened in many ways. One of the ways in which I have explained it is by saying that it was the manifestation of an established divine practice. In my book Meezan, in the chapter on jihad, I state that it is not a directive of religion. I have thus provided a detailed explanation of this episode in numerous ways. For instance, in the chapter Kanun-e-Dawat, chapter on Dawah. Its effects become evident in many places. It is possible to say that this perspective has become the master key to unlock this entire episode. It clarifies the reason for action taken against apostasy, as well as the correct context of the hadith reports mentioning the punishment for apostasy. The true nature of the action against shirk, polytheism, and kufr, disbelief, are explained through it. The very source on which the classical narrative is built, and whose points I have listed, is actually targeted by it. This perspective takes into account the very basis of the classical narrative and alters its nature. It does not challenge that episode, conduct new research on it, or contest any incident within that episode. It accepts the veracity of the occurrence of that episode while clarifying that it resulted, in fact, not due to human effort, but due to a divine process that happened according to a certain law. I term this law as Qanun-e-Itmam-e-Hujjat, law of the completion of proof. You know that when some scholars from my own circle of friends, even a scholar like Amar Khan Nasir, mixed up the divine law concerning the progeny of Abraham with this law, that is, Itmam-e-Hujjat, I had to clarify it in another article of mine titled Kuda Kai Faisleh, Verdicts of God, which has been included in my book called Maqamat. I have separately discussed both these laws. For example, some scholarly minds from my circle placed the action of Solomon, peace be upon him, against the Queen of Sheba under this law, Itmam al-Hujjah, but I had to clarify that it must be placed under the law concerning Abraham's progeny. Similarly, they mixed up the actions of Moses, peace be upon him, or the laws in the Torah concerning the land of Palestine. Therefore, I explained the two laws separately. As a result, the special status of Palestine and the Arabian Peninsula became very clear. What also became clear was the reason why there are special laws concerning these two territories. Similarly, many other historical misunderstandings have now been resolved due to this work. I shall give you a small example. People were unable to understand a certain matter, and it caused huge problems later on. You know that God's messenger, peace be upon him, did not allow the presence of any idol in Makkah. A similar ruling was also given for the entire Arabian Peninsula, which was cleansed of all idols and all raised graves were leveled. Then the Prophet's companions moved out of Arabia, but strangely, they did not break any idol or temple. A very famous instance of this behavior is seen in the conquest of Egypt. A Muslim soldier had broken the nose of a statue of Jesus, peace be upon him. The Muslim general who had conquered Egypt ordered for the search for the person responsible for this. You see, the iconoclasts of Makkah and the Arabian Peninsula are searching for the guilty person. And when the guilty person could not be found, the general presented his own nose to be chopped off as penalty for this act. Notice these two different approaches in the same period and their level of clarity in these matters, given that they had just moved out of Arabia after destroying the idols there. Thus, we see that many issues fall in their proper place because of this new perspective, and we came to know of their true nature. I have thus briefly explained to you the genesis of this counter-narrative and its evolution into its present structure. Therefore, after this, it will not be necessary to present the entire argument in any more detail, and I will only have to explain some minor points as I teach them to you. I feel it is better if you now ask questions about what I have so far presented before you, so that we will not need to repeat this material in the future sessions.
Maulana Islahi was the first to point out the difference between a Nabi and a Rasul.
Yes, this distinction is not prominent in the works of Imam Farahi. He discussed the Sunnatullah in terms of the word Nabi.
So he did discuss this Sunnah of God?
Yes, and he has discussed both the Sunan, including the special Sunnah of God concerning the progeny of Abraham. But he does not discuss it the way I do. For example, while commenting on a Quranic verse, he will point out this special Sunnah of God regarding the Israelites.
Has Imam Farahi's work on the literary styles and coherence of Quran found any appreciation outside the Indian subcontinent?
Even now, it has not been fully introduced before the people. However, people are paying little more attention now. Professor Mustansir Mir was probably the first to introduce it in the West. This was his topic for PhD, in which he compared the commentaries of Tabatabai, Sayyid Qutab, and Tafhimul Quran with Tadabbur Quran to demonstrate the actual nazm of the Quran. This was the first time that Imam Farahi's work was introduced into the West. I do not know of anyone before him who did it. However, there are many people who are aware about it now.
Up until now, how did the scholars explain the two different approaches of the early Muslims, viz., the destruction of idols in the Arabian Peninsula and the protection of idols elsewhere?
If they are faced with such incidents in the Prophet's own time, their usual method is to explain them by the concept of nasikh wa mansukh, abrogation. For instance, in the Makkan period, Muslims were asked by God in the Quran to be patient and forgiving, restrain from retaliation and fighting, etc. Therefore, the traditionalist scholars would say that these directives were subsequently abrogated in the Madinan period. Such things in the Prophet's period are generally explained through this concept of nasikh wa mansukh. In the period after the Prophet, they explain the dichotomies as exceptional cases, keeping in view the interests of the Muslims, and that too when they feel compelled to discuss these things. Otherwise, they ignore them. This is the reason that the Buddha statues of Bamiyan were still intact, even though the Prophet's companions had reached until there. They were not destroyed. However, as soon as the Taliban came to power, that classical narrative was revived yet again, and those statues were destroyed. You can see this in the case of ISIS, where they are destroying many such ancient structures. They destroyed the ancient site of Nimrud. If you go to them, they will tell you the same thing, that the Prophet had similarly destroyed the idols in the Arabian Peninsula.
Are the words Rasul ki Saraguzashti Inzar, account of a messenger's warning, and Sunnat-e-Ilahi ka Zahur, manifestation of the divine practice, one and the same thing or two different things?
They refer to the same thing. What did God do to establish this divine practice? He sent a messenger and established the truth on the people in many stages. When this truth was finally manifested in its ultimate form, God announced his judgment on the people. Seen from God's perspective, it is the manifestation of his unalterable divine practice. From the perspective of people, though, it is the messenger who is seen as doing all these things.
As you said, Imam Hamiduddin Farahi presented the coherence of the Quran in a new way. But is it the case that this concept was not present before him?
Many people discussed Nazm. He is not the first one to write about it. Many commentaries are based on Nazm.
Such as?
Suyuti is there. Zamakhshari talks about it at many places. But what kind of Nazm is present in the Quran? This was not discovered. The kind of Nazm is the main point. It could not be discovered until the linguistic styles of the Quran were discovered. It was impossible to discover it until that time. Therefore, the actual feat of Imam Farahi is not that he informed us of Nazm in the Quran. Many people held that the Quran has a coherent structure. But exactly what kind of coherence is present in the Quran was made known by Imam Farahi.
Question. We do not find any discussion on Nazm by scholars of the Arab world and Al-Azhar. Is it so?
He can inform you better about it, but I do not think that they have done any work on it. As I said, they were introduced to this concept, and Aqsam al-Quran was first published by Rashid Rida, who was arguably the greatest scholar of the Arab world at that time.
But many Arab scholars do mention about the specific nature of some verses, such as Quran 61:9. It's not that they do not mention it all.
Imam Farahi is also discussed in some universities and academic institutions. Not that they do know anything about him, but not on a large scale. No methodical analysis has been done of his works. When I traveled to Doha for the first time, I think in 2007 or 2008, I visited the university to meet Dr. Yusuf Karadawi. There I also met the head of the Department of Arab Literature. When he found out that I was a student of Maulana Amin Ahsan Islahi, he said that he had gone through the works of Imam Farahi. So it is like this. There has not been a thorough appreciation of his works in the Arab world so far. And I am telling you that even the people who were fully introduced to his works could not entirely appreciate its value. People such as Maulana Abul Kalam Azad and Maulana Maududi could not appreciate his whole methodology. They only acknowledge him by the sheer caliber of his work and his knowledge of the many disciplines. The actual result of his work has not had an effect on the people so far. I asked Maulana Maududi about this when I was a student. I asked him that you have spoken highly of Imam Farahi many times and reviewed some of his works. What do you think of his concept of Nazm? He replied that he had his own understanding of Nazm that he has discussed in his commentary, Tafhim al-Quran.